Hello and welcome everybody to my talk to this year's AGU. Here I would like to present you my latest paper or our latest paper evaluating a deep learning approach for mapping retrogressive thaw slumps across the Arctic, and I'm accompanied by my colleagues Konrad Heidler from DLR, the German Aerospace Agency, Sophia Barth, Alexandra Tragowicka and Guido Große. Today's talk is about mapping retrogressive thaw slumps, which are typical features of permafrost landscapes. But first I will introduce you a little bit to permafrost. Permafrost is actually just frozen grounds for at least 2 consecutive years, and it's really important for the global climate. It covers a really large area, so a lot of parts of the northern hemispheric terrestrial landscapes are affected by permafrost. Actually, permafrost underlies around 14 million square kilometers of land area. And it's really important for the global climate. In permafrost soils, there are around 2 times more carbon than in the atmosphere right now. And permafrost landscapes are really highly active. And there are a lot of rapid dynamics which are driven by thaw of ground ice. And one of them are retrogressive thaw slumps. This work is based on remote sensing analysis. And remote sensing in the Arctic has specific challenges. We have short summer season. So for mapping retrogressive thaw slumps, we need snow-free period. We have low sun angles, a very short summer season. We have in a lot of places marginal weather, so a lot of fog and clouds. And we have very little in situ data for training our algorithms or even doing some validation. The big advantage of working in the Arctic is we have a very high image frequency, especially when working with polar orbiting satellites. Let's come to our main target. We are here talking about retrogressive thaw slumps, which are typical mass wasting processes which are initiated and expanding due to the thaw of ground ice. And here you see 2 examples of retrogressive thaw slumps, one in northeastern Siberia and one in Alaska, the Selawik slump. Here on the top right, you see a schematic, how they look like. So they typically have a head wall, a slump floor, and they're progressing gradually over time. Here on the bottom left, we see an example from the Taimyr Peninsula in Siberia of progressing retrogressive thaw slumps from 2016 to 2019. And we see that the erosion feature is expanding inland from the lake towards the land. They're typically characterized by different features. They are erosion features, so typical mass wasting processes, similar to landslides, but a lot slower. They're dynamic. They are typically small, from a few square meters to a maximum of around 1 square kilometer. And they are clustered and have a sparse distribution. That means they are specifically bound to specific environmental conditions, such as the abundance of ground ice, which we often find in formerly glaciated terrain. And sparsity means that their area is a lot smaller than the surrounding land area. Up to now, many studies covered local scale analysis with high accuracy and a lot of manual effort, but with a lack of the spatial expansion and automated analysis. On the other hand, some other studies looked more at the continental scale, but with lower accuracy and lower spatial resolution data. With our analysis, we try to do object segmentation where we want the combination of all these strengths. So we want to look at large-scale analysis with a high accuracy and very little manual effort. Therefore, we're testing deep learning methodology for segmenting objects. So far, deep learning in permafrost is not really commonly used. There are only few studies who are testing and applying deep learning in permafrost studies. Typically, in other domains, it's possible to find a lot of deep learning applications, like for typical everyday imagery, like we see here on a mask RCNN inference on a field photo of myself. But let's come back to permafrost. So there are some studies who are working on mapping ice wedge polygons, which we see here in the middle by Zhang et al., or Lingzhao Wang, who's already trying to segment retrogressive thaw slumps in the Tibetan Plateau. For our analysis and purposes, we created an automated deep learning model framework based on PyTorch, where we feed in our input data, train the model, and run the inference at the end and receive retrogressive ThawSlump footprints. This framework allows us to choose a flexible model architecture, so we can use combinations of different backbone networks, segmentation architectures, but also the automated processing and configuration with YAML files. And the target can be actually any object, be it retrogressive ThawSlumps, but we can also train the model with other features like water bodies or pingos. Of course, our framework also includes different important processing steps like data augmentation or image tiling, splitting, etc. On the right-hand side, you see a detailed workflow diagram. As input, we use several sources which are beyond the 1 or 3 input bands that most mainstream deep learning segmentation methods are using. At first, we're using planet multispectral data, which are CubeSat data with a spatial resolution of 3 meter and 4 multispectral bands, where we also calculate the normalized different vegetation index NDVI. At second, we use Landsat trends, which are 30-meter data, which are multi-temporal linear trends of tesseled cap surface properties. And we also use the Arctic DEM, where we have a relative or detrended elevation and also calculated slope. Furthermore, for training, we also use manually delineated polygons, in total 2,182 for this study. And we found it pretty challenging to delineate retrogressive ThawSlumps. Our data output comprises of binary raster masks and the probability values for each pixel and the vector or footprint, which is currently the boundary of the 50% probability. One of the main challenge is the variability of ThawSlumps, how they look like and what kind of landscape they are. Here on the right-hand side, you see a nice overview of our different study sites and how ThawSlumps can look like. For training and validation of our data, we chose 6 different regions across the Arctic, 4 of them in Canada, 2 in Russia, and we tried to be very variable with the type of background information, with the type of vegetation that we can have to cover most of the different types of ThawSlumps and most of the variability. Among these regions, we applied a 6-fold spatial cross-validation where we trained 5 regions and validated on one, and then rotated through all different combinations. As the image segmentation is highly dependent on spatial context, we are really focusing on regional transferability of the methods because ThawSlumps can be very variable across different regions. In order to receive the best estimators, we created a lot of different experiments. So we chose 6 different regions, a 6-fold cross-validation. We chose 3 different architectures, UNet, UNet++, and DeepLab v3, and 3 different backbones or encoders based on the ResNet 34, 50, and 101. In total, these were 54 experiments, plus 3 for additional epochs. So for the first 100 epochs, we trained on a sparse data set, and for the best 3 models, we trained another 20 epochs. We're a bit limited by the hardware access at that point. Therefore, we chose for the sparse data set. This was a binary classification, so retrogressive ThawSlump or background, and we chose different metrics. One was accuracy, intersection over union, F1, precision, and recall. Let's have a look at the detailed results and examples. Here we see 2 planet scenes. One in the upper one is in Horton, where the ThawSlumps outlined in black. And on the bottom, we see an example from the Lena site. Here in the middle, we see the probability output that this is the ThawSlump. High probabilities in red, low in blue. And this is here from the cross-validated model. So this result was trained in the 5 other regions. And this region here, where we see the result, was unseen to the model. And we see that it gives us mixed results. in the top one, in the Horton side, we see that certain areas are favored, that they were detected as thaw slumps, but other areas, especially in the slump floor, were not detected correctly. On the bottom, we see the result from the Lena side, where it works a lot better. The full model, which also includes training within that region, creates a lot better results, which are more homogeneous, especially also in other areas which were not detected before. Here we see the results of the 54 runs of cross-validation across the regions, across the different architectures and backbones. And here we see the regional results, where we see that certain regions produce better results than others. So, which means that the transferability works in some cases, but not in all. The four regions, Lena, Horton, Kolguyev, and Herschel, produce better results than, for example, Banks Island or Tuktoyaktuk. For Banks Island, that makes a whole lot sense because the region is so much different to the others. For Tuktoyaktuk, that's not so clear. On the left-hand side, you see the gradual change with the training epochs, and on the right-hand side, you see the sorted results from best to worst. We applied the same kind of analysis where we compared the different architectures, and UNet++ produced the best results in almost all instances. In almost all configurations, it outperformed the other architectures UNet and DeepLab v3. These two were not too much different in most cases. But UNet was a lot faster and easier to train. The previous work that I showed you was intended to create useful workflows and architectures and to train great models to upscale the analysis to panarctic analysis. And that's what I want to show you now. So here are the first results of our upscaling to much larger, more or less panarctic scale. Here are some already quite well working inference results that we could produce. So the one on the left is on Banks Island, but this is a different area from where we trained. And the dots are the already published data from Lefkowitz and Wade 2019, where they released locations of retrogressive ThawSlumps. And in black, we see the outlines. And on the right-hand image, we see a result from the Blue Nose Moraine, also in northwestern Canada, where the ThawSlumps are quite well delineated already based on the trained model from the 6 regions. These promising results show us that we're kind of on the right track for a much larger analysis. However, there are also some challenges and inaccuracies, which I show you in the next example. Here we see the tip of the Bykovsky Peninsula close to the Lena Delta in northeastern Siberia. And in red, we see the outlines of the inferred retrogressive ThawSlumps around the coast. That looks quite well and reasonable. But we also see that there are a lot of false positives out on the sea where it's not really clear where it comes from. Other issues that we're having are false positives in lakes and also in wetting areas. To sum up this talk, we presented here an automated configurable deep learning workflow to map retrogressive ThawSlumps, which are very distinct features of the permafrost region. We used planet input data plus other free data sources, and we achieved good results with kind of variable transferability. And to overcome this, we need more and standardized training data required. There are a lot of efforts in the community to really create these data sets. We already started the upscaling, and we need some continuous monitoring and model improvement in different iterations, especially in the upscaling. And finally, I want to thank you for listening. I'm always open to share training data or just have a nice chat and discuss things, how to improve things. I want to thank our funding sources, which is here the Helmholtz AI Core project, but also other projects like the ESA CCI Permafrost or the NSF Permafrost Discovery Gateway. You can reach me here via email. You can check the GitHub repository for this project, but you can also find me on Twitter and also in another talk that I have in the landslide session, how to discover an unknown mega landslide in the Siberian Far East. I thank you and wish you a nice conference.